This is Dan Wilson, and you're listening to Life. And today I'm here with a very special guest, Joe De Kadt. He's a documentary movie maker. I'm sure he's a lot of other things as well. And I did a little podcast last night, Joe, about Ormus and my story with it, how I got
Okay.
into it. It's
Uh-huh.
how you doing?
Yeah, I'm all good, man. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for chatting. It's always fun to talk about these things that we do, isn't it?
Right. So let me just correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll just kind of sum up your experience. You were gonna make a movie. You were going to make a movie about gold mining in Africa or something like that.
Okay. So the route into Ormus, how I fell into the rabbit hole was, yes, I was working on a script for a feature film, a narrative feature film, and I was looking into how people, different forms of extracting mining gold in the informal sector in Mozambique and stuff like that. So I was just on a kind of crazy road trip hanging out with some sort of fairly odd people. I then discovered this story of Hudson online, and I have to be honest, it was probably my first internet rabbit hole. This is
Right.
years ago when I first heard about it. I think it'd been kicking around in my head for about 5 years before I actually went out and made the film. So it was very early on in the days of the internet. And
Right.
it was that point before, I think, well, certainly for me, you know, I my education system obviously had sort of brought me up to believe that the written word, there's something somewhat sacrosanct, or rather cautious about people that put things into words. This is, I learned from books. So the internet, before I'd realized how much bullshit there is out on the internet, I fell into a rabbit hole in terms of reading stuff and thinking, oh my God, well, this must be true. This is extraordinary. That's kind of what I mean about my first internet rabbit hole.
And that was my experience pretty much exactly as well.
Yeah, I
With
mean, it's an interesting, getting into things. It's an interesting baptism of self-education. Wanting to believe, throwing yourself into something, and then realizing you've left yourself open to be potentially manipulated makes it. I think it's a very valuable lesson that, well, certainly for me, it made me hyper aware of making sure I read into whatever I'm reading, what the motivations behind that person's reason for communicating what it is they're saying, especially on the internet when anybody can just, tell you whatever they want.
right. And I think you like you said, it opens you up to, or it makes you vulnerable when you chase these things or entertain these ideas, maybe.
Well, I
Um,
guess, from my side, the reason why I went on the journey is that there was no correlation between what I was reading on the internet and the scientific community. There was just no conversation there. So there was no way of discerning a truth behind this, because there was the people who were saying it was true, and then there was a community, which is a scientific community, that had no idea about it, hadn't heard about it. So I literally had to go and find out for myself. That was my journey was a journey of discovery. It was like I didn't want to go and just meet these people and then make a film to pay lip service. It was about, is this something true? Is this something worth exploring? If it is, this is well, obviously it's, underneath it all is, some kind of alchemy perhaps, which is a very alluring project. But so yeah, it really was about trying to understand if there's a truth to this or not.
sure. And again, that was my experience pretty much exactly. In 2008, my dad got lung cancer. So I was young. I was like, mid early 20s,
Uh-huh.
and I knew he was going to do chemo. I knew he was going to do radiation, and I knew what that meant for our family. Like, it was going to be hard. So in my head, I was just the really optimistic one. Let's get online. Let's start researching. Is there any alternatives? And I went down a rabbit hole, completely started making phone calls, different doctors. I talked to different doctors. I talked to different people, and I just started calling around. Eventually, through recommendations of specific people, they told me about this guy, Medicine Wolf. He's a Native American medicine man. He's got amazing success rate with treating cancer, 100% or something like that. And I'm like, well, I have to talk to him. So I talked to him. He was telling me about his products. It was this old guy in Sedona, Arizona, and he was telling me about his products. And it was, a bunch of different products, but they all had Ormus in them. He never used the word Ormus.
I was about to ask, did he use the word Ormus? Okay, go on.
He used ORME. Everything was ORME, ORME, orbitally rearranged.
Okay, yeah.
And if you went to the website for their products, he had this whole list of audio recordings that he had made, where he was talking about what it is, how his experience studying in Russia with Nobel Prize winners. He had a very compelling, to a young man, just like you said, the internet, it's anything is on the internet. And someone like me with no formal scientific education at all, it sounds mind-blowing to me. You know what I mean?
Yep, for sure.
And so he's got all these products. They're all in a monoatomic state, silver, zeolite, fulvic acid. He's got these different products, and they do these different things. It's like a four-step to health process. The first one is hydrate, then remineralize, then detox, then maintain, or it's something like that. And it's all because of these orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements. And I talked to Medicine Wolf. I paid for a consultation to him, and I had heard of David Hudson. This is 2008.
Yeah.
I had heard of David Hudson, just read about him. He's the guy that discovered Ormus. And so I'm like, so Medicine Wolf, did you discover Ormus, or what are they saying about this guy David Hudson? He's like, Daniel, I learned about Ormus when I studied in Russia, like many, many years ago, and in Germany they knew about it. And I never learned anything from David Hudson. But he was saying a lot of the same stuff that David Hudson said in his lecture, the one you were at, which I want to ask you about. But I'll try to sum up this story quickly.
Yeah.
And it all sounded very scientifically sound. But then he made a leap. He started talking about being in contact with angels. He started saying he had...
We talking about Medicine Wolf, or are we talking about the Hudson lectures?
Medicine Wolf.
Okay, that's interesting.
Medicine Wolf.
Yeah.
So this was in 2008, and for me, this has been a mystery ever since. And that's how I took a long break from it. Oh, first I should say, I took these products for a good year. I was paying hundreds of dollars because, he was saying a lot of the same stuff David Hudson was saying. He's saying, here's the process, and if you follow my process, you're going to stop aging. And here's how it works scientifically. So like I said, without the formal background in science, I was like, whoa. And he had a lot of other people that seemed legit saying, yes, this guy knows what he's talking about. He blew their mind too. So I went for it. I was taking these products. Eventually, I'm just like, you know what? I'm still catching a common cold. I still get, sick once in a while. I don't think these are doing what they say they're doing. And so I just gave up. But the whole story was still a mystery to me. And it goes on and on and on. And I think it's part of the Ormus story. But anyways, I was just like, I wonder what's up with Ormus. And this was like last year. So I just Googled it, and I found your video that you had your movie that you had just made, which awesome movie, by the way.
Thanks, man. So, listen, I hear a lot of similarities in that. It's in terms of my story. I just think it's the classic thing that I've learned of charlatans is to offer like a small bit of new fact, a new secret, a new something, and then off the back of that, it's a confidence trick.
Right.
It's a classic confidence trick. Con man is and off the back of this small favor or trick or whatever, to build a whole new paradigm. And it's interesting that this Medicine Wolf went on and talked about, it sounds exactly the same story that Hudson created. He's just sort of said he's apparently reframed it with learning Russia, or it could have been Mongolia, it could have been Tibet, it could have been, you could have, yeah, it sounds to me like the same old story that I've heard a number of times. Right. It's not to say there isn't something interesting going on with these minerals. I'm still, interested by it, and I still think there's something going on. What I certainly don't believe is the idea that you're gonna that you can transcend information, or you can transcend personality traits, you can transcend spirituality by taking a substance, which is this idea of elevating your soul to another place, and speaking to the angels, as Hudson said, healing sick children by merely holding them. I think actually if you drill down into that concept, and start questioning, well, where does spirituality live? Where does information live? How does the brain work? How can this kind of thing possibly be passed by taking a substance? I think you very quickly hit both a philosophical and a material kind of brick wall, and realize that actually, there's no way you can take a pill, you can take a substance and achieve knowledge. It's not possible.
I agree. It sounds and I'm saying this with a just like a viewpoint. Like, I don't know anything, but I think it's the right approach to be very skeptical of the claims that you're going to, like you said, transcend death and heal people by touching them and never age. I don't know if I would even want that, but I think,
yeah, that's a whole question in itself, isn't it? I mean, listen, I think you want to ask me about the lecture that Hudson was at. I think I can, we can talk about that specifically when we talk about that lecture, because I think that's when I really started seeing how an operator like that plays an audience.
Yeah.
And how these things, I don't know if you want to talk about that now or in a minute, or
sure,
how you want to sort of set up this chat, but yeah, I mean, I can tell you about that now if you want.
Well, just here, let me give you my my input on that lecture, because I watched it a few times since,
So what you watched the Anota lecture from about 5 years ago that Hudson spoke at?
Yeah, it was the one I believe you were at that lecture.
Yeah, I was, in fact. Yeah, interesting.
It's a 2-hour lecture. It's the only real one on YouTube of him explaining this stuff.
Yeah. I was sitting in the audience muttering away.
Wow. Because it's a really interesting story. His whole first hour or whatever it is, hour and a half, he's telling this story about how he's a dirt farmer or a cotton farmer or whatever, and he wants to start mining gold, and he comes across this substance that is behaving it's strangely, and it's a cool story. But then at some point, and it all makes sense and it all sounds sound, but then at one point he just takes a giant leap to this ancient text talking about manna, and then it goes in a completely different direction from there.
So what he there's two things that he speaks that he does that there's one point that he says, and then I was reading this, he's always in every lecture he says, I was reading a Time Life book about alchemy, and lo and behold, in there it talks about the white powder of gold, and I go, whoa. So that's his leap off point for his whole journey to discover this thing is this Time Life book. I finally tracked down this Time Life book, right, and read the whole thing looking for his, this white powder of gold. It's not in there. So that part of the story is made up, right? And I was going to say something else. I can't remember what it was, but it's so he's got this thing of like making these connections, and then suddenly he turns it into the the other thing he says is, I'd sort of went, looked at my family history, and lo and behold, I noticed that, I'm part of the bloodline, the Divinic, So he uses these two subtle ins. It's usually one or two of the other ones. He's using these subtle ins to the biblical and the ancient Egyptians' domains. And with that bridge, then he leaps into this, then starts talking about the esoteric. So he's an incredibly smooth operator in terms of the way he tells that story, without it necessarily feeling too jarring when he takes you into that place. So what was extraordinary in sitting and watching that? First of all, I was already kind of angry when I was in that because they wouldn't let me film.
Right.
And it was like, oh, there was this sort of like, this is our film. We're going to make the film. And Thomas Geckler, who was putting on the conference, I don't know if you've ever. I was about to bitch about him. I'm not going to actually, but he's a
Sure.
Anyway, moving on from that. So yeah, just watching how he played the audience, and then watching how the people in there were lapping up what he was saying, so that at the end he had them in this kind of like trance-like faces, and he gave again the same thing of like, I'm here to get money. Why am I here to get money this time? It's because I'm trying to create a standards system for measuring Ormus. If we can hold that and claim that, rather than the scientific community who are bad and we can really move forward with this science together. But I need money to create this standard system. It was just so many shades of bullshit at that point. It was like, oh, fuck you, man.
Right. So
excuse my language, but yeah.
No, it's all right. My question is, it sounds like if the first part of his story is at all true about his journey of finding this substance and he put all this money into it. So if he got to a certain point where I put all this money into it and I've found there's something here, but there's no way to make money on this at all. But I could maybe, take this other approach.
Right. Well, so what I've discovered since, I took apart and compared every single lecture that had been printed about his. And he was always very evasive about the people that he'd spoken to. He never gave them names. He'd say a guy called John or da-da-da. And I cross-referenced every lecture that I could find to try and figure out the names of these people that he worked with. Eventually figured it out and tried to get in touch with every single one of them. Some are dead, some wouldn't respond. Those who did, all said, I stand by the work, but now one of them, I can't remember which one it was. I got in touch with, I think, John Sikafous and, I can't remember the other name of the other guy. One said, which was very interesting, follow the money. Follow the money from when Hudson was working with, I think, Marietta Metals, or it was the it was an insurance agency in the UK, a metals production company. I can't remember. See, it's been so long, I don't have the names to hand. The thing is, there is something going on with the metals. I've also been in touch with. I'm not going to give his name only because I'm worried that people are going to pester him. Not because it's a secret, but he's a scientist who works at an Australian university. Actually, he's a director of one of the departments there. A cementologist. I don't know if that's the right word, but he works with cement. He's been getting very interesting results with this, with the converting back into metal. But what he's saying, which is what I found out, which is what Don Nance told me, is it's not repeatable in so much as there's a variable in the mix in terms of the powder to metal process, which means you don't get fixed results. No one really knows how it works. No one knows what that variable is. So Hudson probably hit the same kind of wall, got very strange results, got peaks of gold, but doesn't know how. If you can't repeat it, and if you don't know what that missing thing is, you can't actually make money from it. Recognized he had something there which was closely associable to the alchemy story, and from that he could make money, because now he tells a story which people can then sort of buy into, because this is the magical history, that's when it becomes bullshit. That's what a classic con artist will do. That's not to say, again, like I was saying, that there's not something to the story which is of scientific interest. Now, my personal take on it is that these minerals act in a way which we can sort of, I guess, it's comparable to what vitamins were before we knew what vitamins were.
Sure.
I mean, that they're part of our bio in terms of our interaction with us. They're part of the biomechanical reaction for life, but we don't recognize that these need to be in our diet because we simply don't know how to measure them, which is the whole concept of this orbitally rearranged monoatomic thing. elements that we recognize, that we know of, but they're in a slightly different shape, so they don't react to the typical measuring systems that we have.
Right. Yeah.
Now, if you consider them like that in terms of health, maybe some of our health problems, maybe some of the reasons why we might get cancers and things are at some level something like nutrients deficiency. If you can restore that nutrients balance, perhaps that will help cure cancer or the specific kind of cancer. This is all very speculative, but that's why perhaps these things do work in certain situations with certain illnesses. So, but what they've been, people like your Medicine Wolf, and they're proposing it's some kind of universal medicine, which is just, it's so dangerous to say that kind of stuff. It really is.
Right. And so do you think that it was David Hudson that kind of gave birth to the whole community, the whole Ormus community? Was it him?
The Ormus community, yes, because they've latched onto that word. As I said, or maybe I didn't say, but I think these minerals, whatever you want to call them, have been known around, have the trace of them, their footprint has been there for a long time. People have known about them, and there's different cultures, different places where very similar stories arise. And I do think there's, the idea of the manna in the Bible, this white powder that sort of, there's some amazing comparisons there with this powder that we have in, so I think they've been known for a long time. Hudson kind of created this mythology around it, especially by the fact that he then disappeared, which is this perfect kind of internet mystery. It's like, what happened to Hudson? And then reappears. The Ormus community in America are very much based around those lectures that he gave. And they've created a community amongst themselves, which I find a very small-minded and I've been at the receiving end of a lot of stick from my documentary from some of the luminaries in that community.
Sure.
And I really want to disassociate the work that I've done, I suppose, or any further inquiry. I want to disassociate from using the word Ormus or ORME even, because the theory of orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements, that's a theory. No one really knows what's going on. And by giving something a name, you kind of give it legitimacy that perhaps it doesn't deserve yet. Especially, it kind of latches on to the whole Hudson story, which I find kind of problematic, because it's so easy then to be led down that path of bullshit.
Right. And you said you had when we were talking before we recorded, you mentioned how you have kind of a new take. I realized, or I recognized you referred to them as minerals. They're just minerals.
Yeah, what I was referring to about my new take is it's just when I got into this, what was it, 10 years ago, it was, conspiracy theories on the internet. Or rather, there's a lot of information out there which was like, this is the opening of my mind to alternative information. The concept that perhaps, the gold market was being manipulated, or that governments don't work purely for the people. That was the first opening. One of the things that I felt this story could help develop was, democratizing gold and money supply. This was the sort of bigger picture thing that I had at the back of my mind, and there was sort of some political thinking behind this at some level, and obviously it's the extrapolation of the sort of dream of becoming the man that brings alchemy back to the world. When I say that I'm in a sort of different place now, I see the battle with these sort of larger forces as much smaller, less egotistical kind of battle. And I have my own ways of dealing with that kind of stuff now. I see energy production ultimately as a much more interesting place to endeavor to make proper changes, rather than the idea of, making shiny metal and using that to have wealth, to attain power, as it were. That's what I think I meant in terms of, I'm in a sort of different place now. That's why I don't really go back into this. It would be interesting to find out, and do some more experiments, perhaps in terms of how these minerals affect agricultural products. I think that's a really good way to investigate Ormus. Grow some plants, tomatoes, cucumbers, whatever it is, a bit of wheat, put some Ormus on one, or whatever you want to call it, these, pull out these minerals in the usual wet and dry method, put them in a test bed and put them, have a control. I think that's a really good way to see if there's some kind of bioactive properties. And Arthur Ziegler, who I interviewed in the film, the guy in the kind of purple jumpsuit, he did a lot of that work, and that's where there's some really interesting results that he got on that. But bigger picture stuff, yeah, I think there's more interesting ways to spend my time now. And rather than fighting the system, I just want to get on and create my own little my own little dinks into what's happening with the world.
Right on.
I won't explain too much of that.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you is, so you have, you were here for 4 years in the U.S. driving around figuring this out, pretty much?
No. I was on the road for about 4 months, and then again for about 3 months.
Oh.
And the film took about 4 years to complete. In terms of, once I got it back, I had to then try and find somewhere to edit it. I went through a whole process of editing with an editor, and it just it was shit, basically.
Okay.
It was really long and boring, and then I found a very good storytelling editor, Rodney Guest, who really helped me find a way to tell the story. And I think actually what happened is that's right. I came back to the UK, I think, and I started putting it together. And I tried to edit it before I'd met Don Nance, and I realized I didn't have a story. Without the gold angle, I didn't have a story. So I went back on the road, found Don Nance, realized that ultimately the gold was the answer, in so much as, look, I'm not going to get anywhere by just listening to people talk about the magical healing properties of this stuff. There's no way to prove any of this. But if I can get underneath this and say, look, actually the gold seems to be something that has a reality to it, then maybe the rest of it has some kind of truth too.
Right. And so, for people, for people listening, watch the movie. Go to allthegoatsyoucaneat.com, right? And watch the movie.
There you go.
But just walk me through, without giving up any secrets, can you just kind of walk me through of the process of how do you get Ormus, and then what would you do to turn that into gold?
So interesting. Look, the funny thing is, when the film was about me just meeting one person, being led on to the next person, trying to find out. And from the sort of beginning, it was like, what is Ormus? Can you show me how to make it? The simplest way to make Ormus, according to the people I met, is you take seawater, essentially, or reconstituted seawater, as in sea salt, add water to it, and drop in, I think it's sodium hydroxide, isn't it, from what I remember? Drops of that creates a precipitate. That precipitate is some kind of, God, I see, it's been so long, I can't remember anything. Anyway, there's a white precipitate that comes down.
Yeah. You
pour off the water. That, within that, supposedly, the Ormus minerals exist. Whether that white precipitate is pure Ormus, or whether Ormus, whatever ORME materials, somehow exist in the matrix of that material, is unclear to me. A chemist will tell you what that precipitate is. It has a name. I just can't remember for the life of me. As I said, it's been years since I've dug into this.
No problem.
The metal process is taking that powder that you dry out, doing various things to it, which will then supposedly flip the Ormus minerals, which are minerals in the platinum group, according to the theory, minerals in the platinum group that exist in this altered state, will take those minerals and flip them back into the metallic state so that they act as ordinary atoms and will form metal-to-metal bonding, i.e. now linked together in a metallic matrix so that they act like metals, behave like metals, and can be measured as metals. Now, the only reason I'm being a bit cagey is just in terms of about what that method is first of all, you can see it in the film. The information is out there on internet. I did promise Don Nance, who showed me You know, it took me a year to track him down and convince him to let me film with him. He's an absolutely beautiful guy. I was going to say but I'm not going to say but. I did promise him that I wouldn't reveal his method on the film.
Okay.
Just in terms of, you know, my personal sense of duty to here, I think I've got to honour that promise. The information is there. It's not complicated. If you watch the film, you can see pretty much exactly what I do. It's all there. There's one little thing that we sort of pulled out of the edits just to make it a little bit more furry, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But you can find out. It's, you know, it's not magic. When I did these results, as Don Nance said would happen, when I first get the results back, I'm not going to see anything. You know, and when I first got these results back, there wasn't any kind of change, you know, so I sent off my salt sample and I sent off, you know, different parts of the process to Acme Labs in Canada, and there wasn't a spike in any of the gold or precious metals as in the platinum group. I sent off the same sample a year later. I hadn't done anything to it, and I sent off the same sample a year later, exactly the same, you know, from the same pot, and got back the results that I show at the end of the film on that chart, which was, you know, a 2,000% increase in gold, I think an 800% increase in silver, and, you know, copper as well, platinum, basically all the elements that are sitting there in the platinum group of the periodic tables. So what that said to me is, obviously it said to me, there's something going on here.
Right.
I think I tried to repeat it when I got back home. Or what I did it again, and this is like 3 years later, and I sent off the stuff to the lab, and I got a null result again. And I was like massively disappointed because I thought, well, I thought I figured out how to do this. What I hadn't done is sent off the results again after waiting some time. And I was actually, funny enough, I was just digging through a box the other day, and I found these, you know, some samples. But I've lost all my notes. I don't know what is what. I've got a bunch of bits of paper with, you know, white powder folded into them. So, and it costs a bunch of money every time to get a set of results back. I know there's something going on there. This professor, this director I spoke to in Australia, knows there's something going on there. There's a number of people who recognise that there is something going on. Just we don't know. As I said, there's a random element in there that is giving results some days and not others. And to be honest, I've got other things to do in life than sort of dig into this again.
Sure, but I just think that's the story. That to me, that's like that. The end of your movie, it's like what?
So I mean, obviously, in terms of narrative, you know, thank Christ I got that. Otherwise, I would have spent a lot of time on the road and a lot of time making a movie about essentially insane people. So yes, the narrative, you know, it's obviously, you know, thank God I've got that, because that's what makes it a movie. And, you know, there's a build up to that. And, you know, it's also, I made it as an entertaining movie. It is fun to watch. It's not just a bunch of people talking about, you know, what they believe. There is a narrative of me going through and finding out. So, yeah.
Well, a question I had. First of all, I want to say I don't know his name, but the guy that drilled holes in the piece of silver.
Yeah, Dr. Champion.
That whole thing was hilarious. I love that part.
As far as I know, he's either dead or back in prison now. I didn't find out till later that he'd. I mean, God, coming out of that, this guy saying, you know, I think I say to camera, he's either a genius or he's insane.
Right.
It's neither. He's a con artist. You know, so yeah. I mean, he literally put a bunch. Oh, anyway, you got to watch the film to see that whole sequence. But he's disappeared off the charts now, I think. I know that he had all sorts of family problems when I was talking to him, and as in I think it was. I've got to be careful what I say, but I think it was the children of the kids, rather the adult kids of his partner were very skeptical of him, and he was trying to get money out of them or something and they asked me as I finished filming, they said, listen, we really want to ask you, is this guy for real? Because we got money ready to invest in this. If he is, he's been asking us for it. And I said to them, whatever you do, don't invest any money in this guy. I don't know. It could be, I've got to find out results, but, you know, don't invest. So I know that he was going around hunting for investments for his various gold making schemes. And I've had people tell me they've had successful results from what he did.
Where?
So, you know, it's, I don't know. I think he had one method which he sort of sold, which possibly taps into some of the kind of gold flipping of Ormus and gives small positive results. He then takes that, just like the rest of the charlatans do, takes that, amplifies it, and says, well, look, I can make you very wealthy using my, you know, and he sold a machine. He'd sell people this sort of weird oven machine that you see in the film, which is literally just a pottery kiln with, yeah, man, he was bonkers.
Unreal. I just love that line where it's in the trailer. You're like, and you're making gold, aren't you? And he's like, yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating meeting these people. It really was.
Another scene I wanted to ask you about was when you were in Colorado and you found your little hut in the woods and you took some Ormus. What was going on with it? Like, did you?
Yeah, see, that's a really difficult one, man, because I don't know how much of. So to explain what happened, this was, I think, during the first Inota conference. Oh no, went with. I'm trying to get the dates right. It was when this guy rubbed the a little bit of the stuff on my head, and it's so hard to know if that was a real effect or not, because it was mildly hallucinogenic in so much as, you know, my perception felt kind of weird. And the thing is, it's, you know, all you have to do is go and look at what happens in those kind of evangelical churches and see how people really flip out when they want to.
Right.
And I cannot, with my hand on my heart, say what I felt then was an effect of a substance, or if it was me kidding myself that this is the first time I've taken something. I'm on this big journey of making this film, and now I've taken something, and my God, it works, and this is amazing, and da 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 da. So I'm always a little bit reticent to talk about that. It's an interesting little clip of where I was at, you know, at the time, in terms of perhaps emotionally quite vulnerable. On the other hand, it's very possible that those effects were real as well, that I had some kind of, you know, mildly euphoric connection with a substance that my body had been missing for many years. I don't know. It's very hard to look at that purely rationally.
Well, I was thinking about it, and I just tried to put myself into your shoes in that scene. You went to a place. You were going to experiment on yourself with a substance, and you were anticipating an effect.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So just that brain chemistry maybe was enough to make you put you into another an altered state.
Fully. And what was interesting from all of this, right, in terms of me as a filmmaker and a scientist at the same time, is I thought that I could make a documentary that tells the truth, right? Or rather, I could make a film of me trying to find out the truth. The problem with film, right, and the way people consume film is a very large part of that is about entertainment. And I realized that I had to edit in a way. I'm not saying that I told untruths with the editing, but you use music cues, you do things, you know, which will guide your hand from being purely scientific, guide your hand away from being purely scientific.
Sure.
And I found that really difficult to deal with as someone with a scientific background. Of like, I'm making a film. I've put huge amounts of my own resources into this film. I need to make money back. I have to sell this film. So when the second time I put the film together with a second editor, you know, he's a TV editor. He helped me recognize how to make it, you know, into an entertaining narrative. I was actually marketing my in the back of my mind. My market was TV channels, you know, people like Nat Geo or you know, whatever. So I cut to formula, but that meant some of it ends up at some level slightly manipulating it's not the truth. It's not that there's nothing, nothing's out of sequence, nothing's not true. But I would have probably not put that sequence in of me going into the hut in the woods if I was making a documentary about, a scientific documentary, because it's like I don't know the truth behind it. But in the film, it's a great moment because this is when I take my first Ormus. So it's very, very telling. Oh, sorry, it's not really telling. It's a key sort of plot point in the entertainment and emotional narrative of what I go through. Do you see what I mean? It's like you're riding that slightly weird that line between entertainment and truth.
But that's what you have to do. You said it right, perfect. Entertainment value kind of comes first, because if there's no entertainment value, no one's going to watch in any case.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think what you did was awesome. I loved it. I thought you were telling the story from the perspective that I went through. So that's why I was so stoked when I first saw the movie, because I was like, I was just completely baffled by all of this, and I was researching and reading and then awesome. But I totally understand. I just want to go back to, can I just sum up for my own understanding this process? And again, I know you told Don Nance you're not going to give away anything, but so if anyone's listening to this, basically you take seawater, and there's other methods as well, but from what I understand, you take seawater and you put it through a chemical process where you take out this white powder from
you drop it. Specifically, it's sodium hydroxide. That's the thing that drops out that creates the precipitate. And so you drop that very slowly in, and you get this white powdery precipitate that settles to the bottom. That stuff you pour off the water, rinse it a couple of times, let it settle. You get a white sludge. You can dry that sludge out, and it turns into a powder. That's what they call the wet method, and that's what people use to spread on crops and stuff, and some people eat it. That's
the Ormus. That
dried
is out powder.
Yeah, that's what within that, or that stuff is. That's what people calling one of the methods of making Ormus. Yes.
Okay, so then you take that so-called Ormus.
Yeah.
And Don Nance puts it through a burning process of some sort.
Yeah. What we did, I've got to try and remember, is dry it out in the sun. That was it. Dry it in the sun, grind it up, mix it with something. This is the something is a thing that I said I wouldn't tell him what wouldn't. So we agreed on, let's pull one element of the mix out of this from the documentary.
Sure.
Look, as a scientist, I'm it's weird to say that I'm not going to explain what it is, because there's no reason why not to. But it's just, I did give my word to someone about this, and I think that also counts for something. But
sure.
you can find out. It's not complicated to find out. Read a little bit about alchemy. Read a little bit about, and part of it is it's kind of fun. It's kind of a fun journey finding that key ingredient out. Mix it with some of that, and then we put it in a pot and burnt the shit out of it for about 15-20 minutes. And that's essentially it from what I remember. I'd have to go back to my notes or look at the film, but you can see in the film, the whole sequence is cut in order. You see that happening.
And then you take that burnt so-called Ormus that's been burnt with another ingredient, and you send it into a lab. Yeah. And then you are measuring the platinum group metals in it.
Yeah. See, the interesting thing where I sort of stumbled down, when you're, the whole science behind this is about extremely careful measurement. Now, I don't know. Look at it this way: if I could have a substance that I burn, and let's say it's wood, and I burn a piece of wood, and I take a piece of wood and I send that piece of wood off to the lab unburnt, and I get a certain measurement. I burn it again, and I get a 50-fold increase in the amount of iron, for instance. Now, part of that is simply because I've burnt all the rest of the stuff away.
Right.
So you know what I mean? It's like it's not that I made iron; it's that there's less of the other shit that means that my percentage of iron is higher. So I'm not a quantitative scientist, you know, of the kind that would need to be able to look at this data. But all I can say is that what was interesting was it was specifically the platinum group elements that were the ones that really, really increased in quantity. So
and it was, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, it was just that, yeah. So the other
It was
stuff.
the same sample, though. It was the same sample.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. No, I had the very pot that I made that you see in the film. That pot without the handle and no lid on it. That I think either the lid melted off, or not the lid, the handle melted off, or we unscrewed it. I can't remember. I had that taped up, covered in gaffer tape, sitting in my garage for a year, and I opened it up, ground up another piece, and sent it off again a year later. So that, I mean, look, there's a whole interesting thing about that, the time effect, because that presupposes there's energy of some sort still in there powering a reaction, which that's what added a little bit of credence to the idea that Don Nance talks about, that when he first did it, he got really, really sick. I mean, he says it was radiation poisoning. Remember, he holds up those vials to the light, and you can see these kind of bubble holes of sort of decomposed glass. And, you know, the state of the pot that he held up and says this is what he cooked in, you know, peeled up, like you said, peeled it like an onion lid. There's some weird energy going on there, it seems like. That's what made me think maybe there is. That's why we bring in a Geiger counter into the film. We didn't read any energy, any radiation energy. But Christ, you know, I got an old, you know, 50-year-old Geiger counter off the internet. So that might not have worked. You know, I tried it again. I bought another Geiger counter when I did it in the UK here. I had no results on that. Maybe it was the wrong kind of radiation. I don't know. It's possible that Don Nance got really sick. His symptoms are also very similar to mercury poisoning. So maybe it gives off mercury for some reason. Now, mercury has always been a constituent in the alchemical process as well. And sort of interestingly enough, mercury, I think, isn't it just one up the periodic table from gold?
I thought so. In your intro, I think is it the intro? You kind of do some graphics.
So exactly, yeah. And I think if you take mercury, knock off 3 neutrons, 1 proton, and 3 electrons, you get gold. So there's all sorts of fascinating science and pseudoscience behind the ideas here, or not pseudoscience, conjecture, let's say, which kind of they fit together into quite a nice little puzzle in theory. But I don't really know what's going on at all. But you know,
so it needs, you know, someone needs to replicate it, basically, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah, someone needs to put some work into this, figure out what's going on. You know, I'm hoping, at the back of my mind, I'm hoping this is, you know, if that someone can find a great way of accessing really good nutrients, minerals, you know, without having to dig down into mountains and cut up. You know, there's a lot of this stuff in the sea.
Right.
You know, if we could access that, you know, in a clean way to give us the minerals that we need, maybe there's even rare earth minerals there or something. I don't know, man.
Sure.
You know, it's not about making gold and selling that on a marketplace somewhere necessarily.
Right.
But that's interesting in itself, isn't it? Wow, you
the
do
whole
sound
story,
sick.
Yeah. Yeah. Excuse me.
You're all right.
And we're at 48 minutes, so
Okay, good. Thanks for keeping an eye on the time. I think we've done well.
Yeah,
We've kept it entertaining. You so much. I hope I haven't waffled too much.
No, man, you were great. You were great, and I really appreciate your time. And if you're listening to this, go to allthegoldyoucaneat.com and watch this movie, because aside from it, you know, I have a personal story, so that's why it sucked me in, but I think it's a very well-produced movie. It's entertaining. You put together a group of very interesting characters that I was laughing out loud. Like, I really enjoyed it. And there's a big cliffhanger at the end, and I love the movie.
Excellent. Cool, man. Well, look, thanks for your time as well. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. And good luck with everything with your podcast, and I hope you feel better soon.
Thank you so much. All right, nice talking to you.
Take care, mate. Have a good one.
You too.